What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to go into my top 10 fantasy books of all time. Now, there are some rules. We're just going to get right into it. I'm somebody that when I'm considering my top 10, I'm not going to just give you 3 books from one series. No, this kind of list is to give what's the top 10 best. So sometimes that might include, for example, Game of Thrones is going to be on the list. I'm not going to include 2 of the books. It's just going to be Game of Thrones as a series as a whole. Maybe if one of the books is really bad, I might just go 1 through 4, but to not clog this list because it's a part of a whole, right? And if part of the whole makes it bad, then we're going to have to include that. So there can be standalones, or maybe I've only read 1 book in the series. So yeah, that's just the way we're going to do it because that's the way it makes sense to me. And if you don't like it, well, screw it. So let's just get right into it. So at number 10 for me, before I start, by the way, I want to preface by saying probably to a lot of other booktubers and other reviewers out there, I love science fiction and fantasy, but I still haven't been able to read a lot. So I haven't read Wheel of Time. I haven't read a million, any of Tad Williams' books. I haven't read any Discworld. So there's a lot of books I haven't read. So keep that in mind that in this list, I'm sure there's going to be some surprises because I haven't read them yet, or maybe I just don't freaking like them, or, there's still a long way to go in my reading journey. So let's just get right into it. So number 10, a classic, something that got into me in fantasy right away. I used to stand when I was younger, because I'm old as hell now. When I was younger, I was standing in the line with my mom at Kmart to get the Half-Blood Prince. That's right, number 10 is Harry Potter. Harry Potter, I'm sure this is sadly going to be supplanted at one point, but as I was considering this, I even reread this series a couple years ago, and I flew through it. And maybe it even deserves to be higher, but Harry Potter, it is one of those books that really can impact a child's life in terms of their reading future. I've always been a big proponent that we need everybody to read more, adults, kids, but definitely the kids, this new generation. We got to get them back into reading. And Harry Potter is one of the great ways to do that because it is a great storyline. The magic is very, what's the word? Do ex machina for sure. Very convenient at times, but the world building is amazing. Likable characters, funny characters, a great twist at the end. Likable characters. Maybe it is super good and evil, but the world building is what gets people into it. The world building, there's probably never been a better whimsical magic school system done before. And the way it matures, the way you mature with the books, the way that you mature with the characters, all around the world building is excellent. And yeah, it's Harry Potter. Need we say more? Sadly, I do think it's going to be off my list this time next year. So, at number 9, I have Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This book, I remember Hero of Ages, that 3rd book. No spoilers, don't worry. The 1st and the 3rd book, the articulate planning and world building and this kind of twist on what if the bad guy won. And the 1st book especially being this kind of heist thriller, really, and Sanderson always knows how to write a climax. I mean, my goodness. The only thing, and I know this trilogy will eventually be kicked off too, is that I remember hating the romance so freaking much that I almost DNF'd it. I was like, my God, his romance is so YA sometimes, and this Mistborn especially, it really threw me off. But the theological elements and some really, really good characters, especially the 3rd book, in my opinion. But the 1st book, of course, but the 1st and 3rd book and the climax of the 2nd book, really, really, it was one of the first books, I want to say, that really got me reading into fantasy again. The Witcher is a big one, but Mistborn was a big one after reading Daniel Green's review of Mistborn, who was a big, big fan. So, yeah, Mistborn, definitely up there. Number 8 is going to surprise a lot of you people. And that's because it's gonna be Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Now, it's gonna surprise some people because this is viewed as some Brandon Sanderson's like weakest work. But man, this one hit for me. I don't know why. And like, especially if you've read Stormlight Archive, you can see some of the Kaladin elements in this. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like the hero in this book compared to Kaladin and Stormlight Archive, a lot of similarities, but man, do I love that journey. Elantris hit really hard for me. Honestly, Mistborn would be higher if it wasn't for that romance. I mean, that romance really threw me off. It was so unnecessary and so YA and so tropey and so blah, that's why Mistborn's at 9 and probably, But Elantris, the thing that will always keep me interested in books, I love a good theological element in books, especially fantasy and sci-fi. Like the theological components, and when you have like a priest and deep diving into what that means and doesn't mean, and having like an articulate character in that sense with a good arc. Elantris has that, like the writing for the theological components of this book are amazing. I really love that. And I know the protagonist's journey is a little like, it's highly convenient, but I'm a sucker for that kind of story where he's just figuring it out and using the world building and elements around him and kind of from this bottom to up in like a positive way kind of arc. It really hit for me. But the theological components of Sanderson in this book is extremely well written and extremely dense and has a lot of depth to it. It really surprised me. That's why it hit me so hard. The ending is kind of typical, but I don't know, like this book has even grown on me more because I just remember that the theological was so well written and thought-provoking. I really, really enjoyed that. So that's why Elantris is number 8. And I have a feeling that 8 through 10 this time next year, because I plan on reading through Wheel of Time or some other big big fantasy hitters, that I think 8 through 10 might get put off the list. But Elantris will always be a honorable mention for me. Number 7 is actually a book that I read this year, and it's gonna be Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Casal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And again, I know this book will probably be left off the list eventually, because I know there's so many great big fantasy powerhouses out there. But man, this book also hit me. And man, I know the book is super do ex machina at the end. I know. But man, the writing and the dialogue, and there's some great moments in here. It's like grim dark, but positive, in more of a positive Three Musketeers way. Extremely well written. The wittiness is extremely well written here, and it's not over the top, and just the character journey and how the character grows and these kinds of things, like the writing of Traitor's Blade, and also it's done in this way that's so much like revealing like the past. So like you're in the present, and then you have a chapter on the past that reveals more of what's happening at the moment. And I really love this kind of style. So the style of writing, I love a good story, especially when the writing is very unique, like the author, because like that's always the thing with Brandon Sanderson. It's very practical, right? But Sebastian de Casal's writing, like I'm gonna have to reread this book next year so I can do a review on it, because it's really grown on me. Like the do ex machina stuff is blah, but man, the style, the wittiness, the like slow revealing and all this interconnecting weavingness of everything having a meaning. Like, where does greatcoats come from? And why are these characters on this journey? Like that being revealing. And there's some very, very powerful moments throughout this story that, and that with that unique style, like I gotta tell you, like I don't think it'll stay in the top 10 forever, but it's always going to be an honorable mention for me. I don't think this book will hit for everybody, but it hit a lot for me. So we're going to go to number 6 now, and that's going to be Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Now, it's been a long time since I've read this book, maybe like 2 or 3 years, so I don't remember all the details off the top of my head, but I do have to say The hype is real. Think a really down and gritty Assassin's Creed-ish, extremely smart, well-crafted world building and story that's, the bad guys doing bad guy things. I don't know if I'm probably messing that up, sorry, but yeah, The Lies of Locke is definitely a must read if you're a fantasy fan, and I do need to reread this series, and sorry I don't have a lot to say because I don't want to make up stuff. Like, it's been a while since I've read the series, but I remember Lies of Locke. I read that during COVID, and wow, that's actually been 4 years now, not 2 or 3. I remember that hitting quite hard for me. So I won't say more, just a great book, expertly well-written story. Number 5 is, I haven't seen this series in a lot of top 10 lists, and that's going to be Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Again, I mentioned this before. If you want to talk about style, Jay Kristoff has style in his writing, and that's always going to attract me to a book, especially if it's got a good plot and great characters. It's that style of writing where you're doing something unique. It's always going to hit me hard, and it's been a long time since I've read this series, but especially the second book, which was basically, without spoilers, let's say, Gladiator in the Colosseum book. I just remembered the first 2 books it's super dark and gritty, super grim dark, but man, the character arcs in the first 2 books being well written, and then a great style, great flair with a great plot, very fast paced. But yeah, I think the second book especially I remember it being super epic. The third book, we can say had a little bit of a disappointing ending, but man, is this grimdark to the max. And so, yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. I do imagine, I got to do a reread of this, but I do imagine it staying in the top 10 at least. So let's see. Number 4, I have to put the Witcher series. This is the series that got me back into reading. I remember I got my Kindle. I said I need to start reading again. I missed reading my science fiction. I missed reading my fantasy, and the Witcher series was the first series that I bought, and I do not regret that decision at all. Andrzej Sapkowski. There are a couple weak books in this series, but we're at 9 books now. The Witcher, in terms of character arc, and Geralt being such a dense character, the world building in The Witcher, like all this minor world building stuff, and the dialogue in this is amazing. The dialogue and the different interconnective weavingness of like human elements of like racism between elves and like monsters being actually good things or bad things, and The Witcher being like the most realistic version of a monster hunter mercenary that could ever be done, and them having so much backdrop and background, but just the characters are so good. The characters are so good, and always going to be a character first and maybe then world building, I don't know, but characters always first. And Geralt and some of the other characters, Ciri, all of the different minor characters, and just Geralt's interaction with the world is, I just loved reading about all the small stuff. Like there's like some economical stuff. Geralt's interaction with wizards with different desires, the different evil forces, the good forces, him trying to stay out of these things. Like The Witcher, I could see why people are a little bit disappointed at the end, and it is true. I would argue that some of the translation is not all there, but man, I cannot wait to reread the series. I think I've read these in 2019, so about 5 years. I'm really hoping that these still hold up. The Witcher, love The Witcher. Number 3 should not be a surprise to anybody else. It would be a lot higher on this list if it wasn't for the third book, and that would be The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I honestly would have this at 1 or 2. And I've only read the first 3. I haven't read Wind of Truth and I haven't read Rhythm of War, but Oathbringer put this series down a notch a little bit for me. But 1 and 2, The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, especially The Way of Kings for me, because actually I know Words of Radiance is a personal favorite of people. The Way of Kings hits hard for me. It slaps hard for me. Again, Brandon Sanders is an expert in plot and world building, and this is the staple of high fantasy in the more fantastical elements, like if you want something more than that. But man, like, so epic high fantasy. This is the standard. I haven't read Within Truth, but in terms of books 1, 2, and 3, high epic fantasy, especially books 1 and 2. I mean, if I was going to choose, like, books 1 and 2 are in the top 5 over all of these books mostly. Like, I might pick a First Law book and a Game of Thrones book, but books 1 and 2 got a top 5 spot if we're keeping it real. And yeah, Stormlight Archive, books 1 and 2, I've read them twice, and each time it blew me away. The character development, Kaladin's arc, the different weaving of all of these different elements. If you want high epic fantasy, like, this is the go-to. This is the go-to. Number 2 also is not going to be a surprise. It's going to be Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I mean, this is the staple. This is the book of like, books 1 through 3, masterpieces. If you want to talk about characters, the best character development I've ever seen, like, this is top 1 or 2. I mean, this is what, it's not just the world building, but it's the characters, the political intrigue, the way those things are interwoven. At first glance, you think one character is bad, but then you come to love that character and understand and justify why they do things. And then in one way, you think one character is the least honorable, but then you come to realize they're actually the most honorable. Like, and it's done over a couple of books, and the plot twists that are justified and expertly done. Like, Game of Thrones is a series that everyone should read. I don't even care if you don't even like fantasy. The only thing with this is that it is highly complex, and actually this is one of the few times I'm happy I watched the series before I read the books. So I think I only read the first book when I was in high school, and loved it, and then watched the series, and then came back to the series like 2 or 3 years ago. And I was grateful that I understood all the houses and the names and everything, because it made this experience so much richer. Because it didn't feel super overcomplicated to me. So in this way, this is one of the few times I'm glad I watched the series completely first. But yeah, Game of Thrones, easy masterpiece. I can't see an argument for, like, the last 2 books being weaker, which I do agree. I didn't give the 2 books 5 stars, Dance of Dragons and Feast of Crows, but the first 3 books, masterpieces. Easily masterpieces. And the number 1 spot, First Law, Joe Abercrombie. I mean, come on. This is our modern day Lord of the Rings, and I know some of you don't see Lord of the Rings on here, and I know that's blasphemy, but it's not in my personal top 10. Sorry. I understand that it's important, and it's the start of fantasy and all these kinds of things, but just the Old English, I can't. But yeah, number 1, let's get back to it. First Law by Joe Abercrombie. I mean, this is our modern Lord of the Rings in my mind. Like, the characters, the grim darkness, unique characters, unique style, an amazing plot, amazing twist, amazing world buildings, but it's just really the characters. The characters, and even those kind of elements of light and good, but light and dark, but in a gray way. I don't know if that makes sense, but First Law is easily is the modern day masterpiece in terms of fantasy in my mind. I know some people are a little bit more down on books 2 or 3, but I think 1 through 3, 5 stars, easily 5 stars. I think maybe I gave the first one 4.75, but I'm sure on a reread I'll give it 5 based on the outcome. I cannot wait to reread this series because it's been like 3 or 4 years. 4 years actually. I read these in COVID. First Law is our modern day Lord of the Rings. Plot, characters. Characters, plot, world building, fantasy. Yeah, and like characters going on an adventure, like a company of unusual company, kind of like a fellowshipy kind of thing, but completely done in its own way and in its own manner. I have to say, like, First Law, I don't see how First Law gets supplanted at any point for the near future. But anyway, that's my top 10. I've rambled enough. Let me know what your top 10 is. Let me know what I got to get to in order to, I know some of you will probably think 6 through 10, or maybe even 5 through 10 shouldn't be on here. Let me know what I got to read. I need to hear from y'all. I want to know what I got to get to so that we can get some new top 10s in here. So anyway, thank you so much.